If you're new to our channel, we'd love to have you join our little community. Just hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications. We promise it will be worth your while.
Really, by now I should have got used to waking up with a hangover and waking up somewhere different. But as I slowly woke, I found that I was lying on a mattress in a small room, and I was cold. Really cold. Shivering a lot. And I was bursting to pee. And as I rolled over to stand up, I squashed a soft lump on my chest. Reaching up, I felt something like a breast, and there was a second, firmly fixed to my chest. It seemed all wrong, but other things were more pressing. I sat up, looking about me, and over in the corner was a bucket-like bowl. I stood up and unsteadily went over and reached down to pee, but there was nothing. At least there really was something. I could feel that I was wearing rubber briefs with 2 holes down below. I just had to go, so I squatted over the bowl, lowered and tried to empty myself. If I kept my legs together, only a squirt came out, but if I opened them, then there was a gush. And at the same time, it made a different noise in the bowl, and I found I could play a sort of a tune. Of course, it took much longer than usual, but what a relief in the end. As I finished wondering what to do about the dribble, I felt my lumps again and tried to pull one off, but it was difficult to get hold of, and it hurt when I tugged, so I left it alone and stood up. I then tried to pull off the briefs, but they too seemed to be firmly stuck to my body, and there was no edge or anything really to get hold of. It was only then that I could see that my fingernails were bright, shiny red. By now I was properly awake, and my shoulder really hurt where Akita's fingers had dug in for so long. I wanted to massage the place, but found instead a soft rope in the way. I pulled on it only to discover it was fixed firmly. Reaching up, I realized that my spikes had gone, and that the rope had a twin on the other side of my head. I was just able to see the ends, which were blonde. As I was looking at its end, I could see that my breath was distinctly foggy, and it dawned on me that the reason I had woken up was because I was cold. Not just because I was naked, well, almost, but because the room was freezingly cold and it seemed to be getting worse. And it was. My breath was becoming cloudier, and I started shivering as minute by minute it got worse, the cold reaching deep down inside of me, and I was shivering even more. I searched the room, absolutely bare. Nothing except the mattress and the bucket. But yes, there was a bag over in the far corner, which I opened and tipped its contents out. They made a heap of black clothing which I prodded about and found a pair of gloves, and then some long socks which I drew on quickly. That left a pair of small pants and a rolled-up bundle. Pulling on the pants, I discovered that they really were surprisingly stretchy and covered the rubber completely. I unrolled the bundle, which was stiff and had things dangling from it. It was a corset just like the ones that the girls had been wearing. What a ridiculous thing it was. But it might help keep me warm, but my fingers were almost numb, and though working out how to wrap it round me was easy, actually hooking the 2 sides together was not. They had 2 rows of metal hooks which had to be lined up exactly to hold it all together, and at the same time, I had to get my boobs into the cupped pockets at the top. If I didn't, then the maddening thing wouldn't come together, though already the pull on my shoulders from their weight was less. At last I managed it, and realized that the dangling bits were to hold the tops of the socks, which weren't. They were stockings, and after more fiddling, I clipped 3 onto each top. Once I had pulled on the gloves, which went up past my elbows, I was pretty well covered and was feeling a little bit warmer. So I climbed back onto the mattress, and I curled up onto it again as much as the corset would allow. Though hardly had I done so, when a panel in one wall slid aside and in came 2 of the girls. One reached out a long gloved hand, and pulling me up, lead me outside without a word. There, in a long corridor where the difference in temperature hit me, it was warm, and I was able to think a bit more clearly. How could I escape and get back to my team? Especially as I had no idea where it or I was. Too late. The corridor ended in a covered courtyard with several more black corseted blonde pigtailed girls standing in 2 rows. My 2 guides hurriedly pushed me to the back to start another row with them. One more girl joined us, and then Akita arrived. She called out something, and one of my girls answered, grasped my arm, and pulled me to the front. There she was, subject to a long tirade, none of which I had a clue, though it was clearly abusive. Anyway, she turned me round to face the others and ran off somewhere, and I was left standing alone whilst the other girls stared back at me. I realized then that none of them were actually Japanese or Asian. Some had blue eyes even. And then wham! I felt Akita's hand grab my shoulder and her pulling at something at my back. Whatever it was, I could feel the corset drawing tight around my middle, and somehow the panties were also pulled hard up into my crotch. She kept on pulling and heaving until I could hardly breathe and yelled out in pain. That seemed to please her because, after another heave, she stopped and spun me round to face her. She promptly pointed down to my feet and rattled away in Japanese. What was clearly annoying her was that I had no shoes on, just stockings. It wasn't my fault. There hadn't been any shoes. It wasn't my idea to get dressed up like all that anyway. I'd had more than enough, and I swore at her in my best Welsh. She couldn't have understood a word, but she just glared at me, then burst out into loud, high-pitched laughs with her huge breasts bouncing up and down. Just then, the girl she had sent off arrived with a bag, which she emptied out on the ground, making a little heap of black shoes. Akita snorted and waved at the heap. Obviously, it was for me to try to get a pair to fit. I tried to bend over, but the tight corset dug in and I could hardly breathe, so I managed to squat and search amongst the heap. Getting rid of those that looked too small or big, I selected a plain, shiny one which went on well, and finding its twin only took a second. But standing up was grim. I tottered backwards and then sideways before settling down properly upright. And that, to my surprise, there was something like a cheer from the other girls, more contralto than soprano. It suddenly crossed my mind that perhaps they were just like me and not girls at all. Whatever! Akita screamed out, and everybody trotted quickly out of the courtyard, so I did my best to follow them. It wasn't far to my relief. The shoes kept tilting sideways, making me unsteady. Everybody filed through a doorway into a dimly lit room, filled with people sitting in rows watching a stage at one end. As soon as we entered, a number of spotlights shone on the girls following them as they made their way along the front of the stage. There they stopped and turned towards the audience and waved. As I was the last in, the girl in front motioned to me to stay in the corner and presented me with a large round tray full of glasses of clear liquid. And then I also was lit up, which produced a cheer from the audience. The lights then dimmed, and the spots played upon the stage to show 3 almost naked girls grasping tall poles. At the same time, a drum roll began. My girls then came to me and took a couple of glasses each from the tray and quickly found takers amongst the audience, skillfully dodging hands reaching out not for a drink, but for a bottom. I was very thankful that if I was truly stuck as I was, then my job was so boring just standing, wobbling in my heels with a tray. I couldn't really see the audience because of the spotlight playing on my drinks tray, so I watched the pole dancers instead. I had no idea until then how flexible a woman's body was. I'd not got a chance with a corset like mine, even if I'd wanted to, I thought, and began to feel the constriction of my panties worsening. Things were getting excited down below, so I turned carefully away on my high heels so as not to spill anything, back towards the audience. Dafid, is that you?" I couldn't believe it. Somewhere out there was my best friend Hugh's voice coming from the gloom not far from me. I couldn't see him, but pushed my tray towards the next girl who came to me, and raised my arm high. Out of the audience came my mate stumbling along a row of seats, whilst a chorus of catcalls and choice words erupted. Those damned shoes were my undoing. As I tried to get over to him, I stumbled and fell into his arms. "Hugh, yes, it's me. Get me out of here now." As we turned towards the exit, there was the bulk of Akita bearing down upon us with a vicious grin on her face. Hugh stood stock still and yelled, "Scrum down!" In an instant, we were surrounded by the entire forwards of our team, with locked arms, with me in the middle as hooker, which in a way I suppose I was. As a mass, we barged her aside and out through the exit, followed not just by the rest of the team, but several of the girls. Outside the building was a bus into which everybody piled. Hugh and another of the team grabbed me and pulled the luggage bay open and pushed me in amongst the cases and packs, slammed the door shut, and off we went. Fortunately, we seemed to be on good roads as I wasn't bounced about much. I didn't care. At last I was back with the team and my best friend. Things were suddenly getting very, very much better. Well, up to a point. I hadn't had time to say anything to anybody, let alone Hugh, though later I learned that he had stood by me. Whilst I was laying in the gloomy luggage bay and the bus had started, he had stood up and argued that since I had been put through so much entirely by members of the team, it was up to them all to help sort things out. It seemed that Mr. Reynolds thanked him and agreed that as much as possible should be done to help and get me home safely, all the more so as I had not been able to play in either match. I was so relieved to be free from Akita and back with my team that I wasn't bothered what would happen next and just huddled up against the baggage. It wasn't until later that I discovered what was going on. Apparently, the second match had not gone well, and we had lost, which had made the home team embarrassed for us. What was much worse was that the team had turned up for their flight, only to learn that it had been cancelled. That was, of course, an enormous loss of face for the management of the home team, and hasty alternative plans were made. A very rich supporter had come up with a special flight just for us, not back to Bristol, but to Cardiff itself. He had also arranged for everybody to go to one of his own special entertainment venues while they waited for the plane to be scheduled, and for transport to take everybody to the airport. Meanwhile, after quite a time, the bus slowed down, swung around a couple of times, and stopped. The door opened, and I was flooded with light. We were at the arrivals section of the airport. Someone grabbed my arm and pulled me out. Whoever our benefactor was, he had great power, because we all streamed out of the bus, which was actually parked on the runway a short distance from an airplane. No queuing, no customs, no body search, just a set of stairs. So no argument, up we all went. We were welcomed aboard by 4 stewardesses, who left it up to us where we sat. Hugh waved to me and came to the seats he'd grabbed quite near the front. At last, I had a chance to thank him for rescuing me, and not only that, but what made him think that the girl with the tray was actually me. Has nobody ever mentioned the way you stand? You always stick your left leg out in front. It looks awkward. Nobody else I've ever seen does it. I had been worrying about you and where the hell were you, when suddenly there was the leg. I began to tell him about how I got like that, but I started working backwards and kept remembering different things. It all seemed so weird. Fortunately, after a while, everybody belted up. That meant that because of my corset, I was very firmly pushed down into my seat. The stewardesses walked up and down checking, and shortly with a long rumble we took off. Before long they disappeared up front, and then reappeared in navy tunic-like dresses with their trolleys to serve out drinks. One of them came directly to me and said, "Well, young sir, you must feel a bit naked dressed like that. I don't envy you. Would you like to come with me up forward and see what we can do for you?" Up I got, walking a lot better, and followed her. Once we got into the little private galley area, she said, "A couple of your friends have told me how guilty they feel for having got you into so much trouble back there, and asked if there is anything that we can do to help. One of my girls is about your size, and we talked a lot about you, and how we might be able to do something. You really can't go on in public dressed like that, now can you? Jane is quite happy for you to borrow her uniform until we arrive. It's hanging up there along on the 3rd hook, so help yourself, and meanwhile I'll leave you to it. If you have any problems, just call me back." With that, off she went. Now, the nice thing about their uniforms was that it was straightforward. A shirt and bow tie, a skirt and a jacket, not all that different from what I usually wore back home at college. Well, trousers, of course. The shirt had buttons, but they were on the wrong side, which threw me a bit, though there was quite enough room for my top. I finally managed to do up all the buttons. I realized that as I moved, the shirt gave off a very flowery smell. Quite nice, really. The bow tie was on elastic, which clipped on, and was easy to get in the middle of the collar. The skirt was a bit of a bother because its zip would be behind me and had a button as well. But I pulled it on, and when I'd done it up, I just twisted it around. The jacket was no problem at all. I had just finished when she came back through the curtain. "My, you do look smart. That's so much better. But let me pull your shirt down a bit. It's sticking out of your jacket and it's all twisted. We girls usually hitch our skirts right up and pull the shirt down smoothly all round. You could try that first." So I did just that, which seemed to please her. "Well done. Run your hands round to smooth the skirt down nicely. That's perfect, but we can't have you with pigtails. It's against airline rules. Hold on, come here and I'll see what I can do." She went behind me and spent quite a while unplaiting my ropes. I could feel her fingers separating the braids into a normal style. She said, Again, rules don't allow us to have long hair showing, so I'll have to make a bun at the back. So it's just below your cap, though you won't be wearing one aboard." There was a bit more gentle tugging, and I could feel things being pushed into the hair. "There, that's all regulation style, off you go." No, wait a minute. Try this lippy." She held out a lipstick and pointed to a mirror on the wall. I guessed that it should be smeared over the lips and tried doing it while looking at my reflection. "Go easy. Just keep to your natural shape," she said, whilst holding out a tissue. With that, she gave me a pat on my bottom and lifted the curtain. I finished my lips, and I stepped out onto the walkway and a cheer went up, everybody standing and waving. I expected that I blushed, but feeling much better dressed, I walked back to Hugh, trying not to stumble because of the heels. I realized yet again how restricting the corset was when I tried to sit, though the jacket and skirt helped me get comfortable. In an odd sort of way, I felt a lot more normal, even though everybody else was in t-shirts and jeans. Several of the team came over to chat, some apologized. I suspect others just came to ogle. Actually, a couple were quite complimentary. Whatever. Over time, the drone of the engines made everybody drowsy, and most nodded off. Later, the chief stewardess came along to us and said, "I've been discussing you with the captain, and how we get you through immigration without a passport. They'll be much tougher here than in Japan. We think the best thing is for you to wait behind, till all your friends have left, and then join us when we leave and head for the cruise entrance. As long as you keep in the middle behind the pilot, co-pilot, and purser with us around you, you should be okay. Jane has said that she'll keep her dress on and hope to change with you later. And don't forget your cap." Hugh said, "That would be great, thank you. I must go and tell our coach what you've suggested, so that he realizes that if the team stays together and goes in slowly, it will keep customs occupied." Off he went, and with a bit of arm waving back to me, told the team captain as well as the coach how the crew were going to help. After all that, when he came back, we spent a while trying to see if I thought that we could get away with it, and what we'd do once in the terminal. At some stage, we must have dozed off, because we were startled later by the tannoy warning us that we should be arriving shortly. You could feel the atmosphere of excitement, that at last we were coming home. The engine noise changed then suddenly with a double bump we had landed, and as we taxied, everybody stood up and cheered, some turning round to give me the thumbs up. Hugh gave me a friendly prod and left me to it, which reminded me to put on my cap. I remembered to be careful to put it on straight above my bun. I sat waiting until there would be nobody else aboard. The team left quickly, thanking the stewardesses as they left, though one or two turned to give me the thumbs up as they stepped outside. As soon as they had gone, cleaners came aboard, and the chief stewardess waved to me to join her. Though I was a lot more confident now, going down the steps was a trial in my heels, so I clung to the handrail. The stewardesses waited till I was on the ground, then went over to join the rest of the crew. The captain was great. He strode off and led us through the crewway as though he owned it, half saluting the official standing there, who just grinned back. Once the captain turned and gave me a big hug, the other men waved and went off separately, whilst we girls turned into the hostess's restroom. Jane took my arm and walked over to the toilets. "I expect that you'll want to do things, so when you are ready, strip off my uniform and I'll swap it with my dress." "Oh, hold on. I'll take my cap now, thanks." Well, that was a relief. I took off the jacket, unzipped my skirt, and pulled my knickers down. I had got used to the gush when I sat down, so I stuck my leg out and kicked off the knickers, just for fun while it was happening. I was so relieved after the tension of getting through the entrance had gone. Together we'd done it. As before, undoing the shirt bothered me as the buttons were on the wrong side, and I didn't want to rip it. But finally I called out for Jane. With a thud, the dress flipped over the top of the cubicle door, which I partly opened, and handed everything out to her. Well, not the knickers. Anyway, pulling them up, I reached for the dress and found the bottom and flipped it over my head, luckily the right way round. It dropped easily like a tube down my body, as it had a silky lining which was still warm. I had learned by now to reach for the hem and pull it down, which helped it smooth neatly over my boobs and sit properly on my shoulders. I stepped out into the room. Already Jane was back in her uniform and cap. She reached out and spun me round. That's great, but a ponytail will be a lot more attractive than a bun, which isn't very fashionable. Hold on, I've got a crunchie. She reached round and showed me a small bundle of colored silk over her fingers. I could feel her pulling the things out behind my head, then a bit of gentle tugging. Okay, that's done. Give your head a couple of swings to loosen it up. Nice, now let's go and find your team. So we strode out, the others pulling their little cases behind them to the main concourse, and there they were all standing in a group with their luggage. The girls stopped, and two gave me a kiss on my cheek. Jane was next and last, the chief stewardess. She said, "I really do hope that you get home without any trouble. You have really coped brilliantly so far. Good luck, youngsters." With that, I went over to the group, which parted as I approached, and asked the coach if I could talk to him privately. Before he agreed, a loud voice called out that he was from the Western Gazette, and could they have a few pictures? There was a series of flashes, and then a man approached us with a microphone. He wanted to know how the tour had gone, what the Japanese team was like, and how we had enjoyed ourselves, on and on. I could see he was working his way over to me, which scared me stiff. I'd had more than enough of the whole business. I said to the coach, "Can we get out of here now, please?" He understood completely, so we worked our way back out of the crowd, only to find ourselves confronted with a bearded man, complete with a large video camera pointed at the pair of us. Mr. Reynolds was brilliant. He grabbed the front of the camera and pushed it back into the man's face, before grasping my arm and propelling me towards the exit. I had no luggage, so I ran through the doors. You can imagine my relief to find the airport shuttle bus waiting with its doors open and engine running. I stumbled onto the platform and the doors closed as I sat down. We stopped a couple of times to let people and their bags off before we got to the terminus. Once there, the doors swung open and I stepped down in familiar territory. It was only a few hundred meters from where I lived. Everything seemed at last to be in my favor, so I tried not to walk too quickly, really just out for morning stroll. I didn't want anybody to be curious. Once at the end of our street, I walked more quickly and turned into our house's path. I knew that at that time of day everybody would be out at work, so I went round the back to get the secret key to let myself in. Suddenly I heard a voice which sent a shockwave through me. It was our neighbor, Mrs. Lewis. Truly knicker-wetting. "They are all out, dear. Can I help you?" I nodded without saying anything, holding up the key and smiled at her. Then I unlocked the door. I couldn't risk speaking. She'd recognize my voice, she knew me too well, even if I did try to disguise it. Once inside, I checked that I was really alone. No one in the house, before going up to my room. There, I stripped off completely, trying not to mess up Jane's dress. The most difficult part was the corset. I'd undone the clips for the stockings, but I couldn't reach behind where Akita had tightened it up. By breathing out to make my chest smaller, I was able bit by bit to unhook the front and throw the damn thing on the floor. Next, I ran a deep bath. Climbing in, I lay back and soaked for a long time. It helped settle the pain in my legs from wearing high heels for so long. And all the aches and worries of the last few days seemed to melt away into the hot water. After a while, I tried easing the breasts away. Slowly, very slowly, they peeled off, first one and then the other. I rubbed away the last of the adhesive and then tried to get out of my pants. That was not as easy, though my nails were quite long. I couldn't lift an edge, though finally, with a lot of prodding, I managed it. It took a while, but after a lot of pulling, tugging, and wriggling off, it came. What a relief. The last thing to do was to get rid of my hair, or rather theirs. I held my breath and ducked my head under the water. I had to do that several times before at last I could loosen it and slowly peel it away. At last, I was me again. I rinsed and rinsed the glue away. Back in my room, I sorted out my trousers and shirt and quickly dressed. I bundled all the black underwear in Jane's dress and pushed it far under my bed. I looked out of the window to check that Mrs. Lewis was not lurking about, and turned to check in the mirror that I was tying my tie properly. Just as well, I had forgotten all about my face and eyelashes. It was a complete mess of smeared lipstick and black from my eyes all down my cheeks, saved by a quick glance. Back to the bathroom, where I found a bottle of makeup remover on the shelf. Miraculous stuff. Everything wiped away. It didn't work on my nails, though, which I had got so used to that I almost missed their bright color. Quickly, I went through to my parents' bedroom, and on the dressing table, amongst several bottles of different reds, was a bottle of clear liquid. That was just as good. Melting the color off on some tissues, I wiped every vestige away. Even deep down in the corners, I was learning. This time, I gave myself a very thorough look over in the mirror. At last, I was street-worthy again. I was worried about Mrs. Lewis, but I couldn't see her outside, so I picked up my backpack and called her on her landline phone. It only rang a couple of times before I heard her voice, so I canceled the call. She was definitely in, so I could leave safely. I was out in the street for a couple of minutes, walking casually, until I was round the corner when I had to run to catch the bus. It was so much easier in ordinary shoes and trousers. There were only a few people on board, so I could sit alone. I really needed time to adjust back to my normal life. That got easier as we approached the college, watching familiar sights as we passed, and slowly I felt everything that had happened over the last few days was a figment of my imagination. I hopped off at the college stop and joined a few others of my year. I realized that actually, though, a few had heard about the Japanese rugby tour, nobody knew that I had ever gone. The pictures in that evening's paper of the returning team and a girl in a navy dress thankfully meant nothing. I never did discover Jane's address,